It's finally time for some mods on our F80 M3. Now, we've enjoyed this car in mostly stock form. Yeah, it's got a few things, air suspension and wheels and, exhaust. But now we're gonna at least do some things that can get us ready to turn up the boost a little bit. By that, we're gonna be installing these charge pipes. Now, Turner Motorsport, they have just been killing it lately with all the offerings that they have for the BMW. All of the chassis, as a matter of fact. They're even going back as far as the E36 and making stuff for those too. But these are specifically made from Turner Motorsport for the F80. It's a whole charge pipe kit. So we're gonna be doing the hot side and the cold side today. This will be also a very good time to do your spark plugs if you haven't already. We have a separate DIY filmed for the F80 on that. So we're gonna start by removing this plastic cover. You're gonna have a push tab right here, which I don't have mine installed. So you pull that out. Then you have these three 10mm plastic tabs, which are just gonna unscrew a little bit. So you know that this is lined up when both of the arrows are pointing at each other. So we're just gonna turn it counterclockwise about 90 degrees, and that's gonna unlock. You don't need to go any more than 90 degrees. You're gonna do that for all three pins. The passenger side is the exact same thing. You have a push pin on the corner, then you have the three 10mm tabs. Now we're just going to pull off this middle rubber seal. Before pulling off the seal, we do need to remove this rubber line that's tucked inside of the seal. Oftentimes people don't have it on the seal itself, but just hanging underneath. You're just going to pull it towards the front of the car. This section slides onto the lip. Next up, we're going to be removing the strut bar. There's going to be 3 E12 bolts on each strut tower. Then we're going to have one 13mm bolt in the front section right here near the radiator, one on this side as well, and then we're going to have a 10mm bolt going to the expansion tank. On the driver's side, you're going to have a push pin for this rubber seal that's going to encapsulate the strut bar, which technically you could slide it out, but we're going to just take this push pin out and it'll make it a little bit easier. Now we're going to remove this engine cover. It's just held in with a couple of grommets. So we're just going to lift up. There's one in the back as well. And one right here next to the cooler. So now we're going to pull out this air box. You're going to push this tab in to get the sensor unclipped. While you push the tab in, you're going to pull the connector out. Now we're going to undo the intake pipe from the air box. You can use a 6mm socket or just a flathead. Loosen up this hose clamp. And you're just going to pull it off of the air box. And then the air box is just going to lift up and out. So the air box is going to slide in to the intake tube that's coming from the front. And you have these grommets, one right here and one on this side. And this one is just going to hold it in place just to stop it from vibrating. So now we're going to remove this intake boot. It's held in with another clamp just like this right here on the bottom. So you could use a 6mm socket or a flathead. And now we're just going to pull this whole intake boot off. Here's the clamp. And the clamp is only going to go in one way. And you also have a line to line up the pipes. Now we're going to remove the charge pipe external Torx bolts. They're E10s, one on each one. With the 2 lower bolts out, the external Torx, we're going to remove the clamps off of the charge pipes. So I'm just going to remove it off of the cooler side since we are going to be replacing these charge pipes anyways. So I've got these 2 clamps loosened. You can use a flathead or a 6mm socket. On this charge pipe, you're also going to have this positive cable going through. Just make sure you pop it out of the bracket. This section is just going to slide out. This is the one that's really on there tight, so you have to pull it out. This one's next. Now that we've got the stock hot side charge pipes removed, we do need to replace the cold side one as well. In order for us to do that, we have to lift up this whole cooler. So in order for us to do that, we're gonna remove some of these things right here to make some space. So we're gonna remove this air box next. It's the same concept. You've got one clamp, 6mm, and then you've got a mass airflow sensor connector. You just push the tab in, pull the connector out, then you lift the whole assembly up. So we do need to remove this hose from the actual air box. We're gonna just lift it up out of its spot. And then we have this section right here which holds it together. You wanna push the 2 pins together and now let it release. Push this boot off of it, just like that. And you also have the evap hose that's hiding underneath this coolant hose. You push the 2 tabs in on the side and it should flare it up so you can pull it off. Now we're gonna lift this whole thing up once we get this mass airflow sensor disconnected. And then you just lift up. I had to remove this clamp right here so we can lift the charge pipe up. This connector right here, same thing, you just push the middle tab in and push the connector down. Then we're gonna have this bolt for this pipes right here. That bolt right there, external Torx 10. And then we have another external Torx 10 right here that we gotta remove. And that's just so we can move all of this without putting any kind of stress on the pipes. And the expansion tank also just pushes into a grommet down here. And we also have this 10mm bolt for the expansion tank bracket. All right, so we're just gonna lift this expansion tank up off of the grommet so we could just let it rest to the side, give us some more space. Now the goal is we wanna free as much stuff off of this charge cooler as we can without removing the hoses, so you don't have to refill the cooling system or anything like that. That way we can just lift it up, put it to the side, and then change that pipe that's down there. We're gonna be changing the pipe that's down here. This is the cold side pipe. Now you can see there's an evap hose going to it right here. You're gonna push the 2 tabs, one on the top, one on the bottom, push it together and pull off the evap hose. And then we just have this connector right here for the map sensor. And then we just have the bolts that are holding the piping, the brackets just to that. All right, so first we're gonna remove this map sensor connector. It's the same thing, you have the tab, just like the mass airflow sensor. Then we're gonna remove the evap hose that's going into that pipe. Just wanna push the 2 tabs together and then pull the hose out. It's the same as it was in the front. You push these 2 tabs in, flares out the sides, and as those sides flare out, that's what's holding it onto the actual, the nipple that's on there. I guess, I'm not sure if it would be called a nipple, but whatever it's called. And when you push these 2 together, it releases those tabs and lets you pull it out. So another tip would be you push it in a little bit while you're doing this and it comes out. Same thing with the mass airflow sensors and even that map sensor connector. There's a tab right up here. You can put your fingernail on it, lift the tab up as you're pushing down from the actual section, and then you'll be able to pull it out. So with any of these connectors and stuff like that, that's like really, really tight on there, what I always do is I push the connector in to the actual sensor or whatever the case may be, push it in while you're pushing the tab down, makes it easier to release. Now we're gonna start unbolting the brackets for the piping. That way when we do lift this up, there's no stress. This is gonna be an E8. Now we're going to loosen this clamp. You can use a flathead or a 6mm socket. You want it pretty loose, that way it makes it easier to pull out. Just like there's a clamp right here on the top with the 6mm, there's also a clamp on the bottom. It's usually hidden underneath this cooler. So we're going to go ahead and loosen that as well. That way it'll make it easier to pop this whole thing off. Just in case this whole rubber hose section is stuck on this, it'll be easier to take it off of the plastic pipe itself. Now we're going to remove this vent pipe off of the bracket. That way when we lift this whole thing up, it doesn't come with it. Same with this connector. Just lift it off and put it to the side. Now you just want to make sure there's nothing else holding on to this. That way we can lift it up. So we lifted it up off of this grommet right here, this one right here, and then there's one all the way inside in the middle right here. You might have to go from the other side. So now we need to remove this pipe right here, which is what we're replacing. So you should be able to twist it a little bit. There's electrical wire that's hooked onto a bracket just like this on the side of this pipe. So we're just gonna pull it out. So the way you pull it out is you just pull this tab and you lift up the actual wire, like that. So just make sure that's out of the way. Sometimes the whole clip might come off, which is okay as well. Now this should allow us to twist this. And as you twist it, it's gonna reveal this white zip tie. Now we need to pull this zip tie out, just like that. So it's held into this tab right here. Just use a pick, lift up and out. Now we're just gonna grab it and try to pull it out like that. There we go. Now we should be able to just pull this off. Slide it around, and voila. So the pipe we're using is made by Mode, but Turner Motorsports also has their own pipe. It's a little bit different, and you're actually going to reuse that zip tie. The Mode pipe comes with this metal clip, but it also comes with these two plugs that you need to plug in these holes. This is for any kind of methanol injection or anything like that that you want to do in the future. Right now, we're not going to be doing any of that, so I'm going to put some thread locker on these plugs. That way it doesn't loosen up and it kind of seals it as well, so there's no vacuum leaks. Now thread locker you want to use is just going to be blue. You can also use a thread sealant. Now you want to do the same thing for the bottom one. Now we can install the coupler. I actually put some Vaseline on the inside to make it easier to slide in. A little bit of lube goes a long way. And then we've got this clamp that it comes with. One is smaller than the other. So the coupler is going to be different sizes on each end. The smaller size is usually going to go onto the pipe, and then the big wide side is going to go onto the cooler. Now if you had a different cold side pipe, you would have to put that zip tie back in to hold it in place. But since we have our clip, we're good. Now this clip is a little bit bent, but still secured where it needs to be. That's why I kind of scratched up that coating. Not a big deal. I've got both clamps on here. We made sure that both of these ports are plugged in, and we actually ended up putting Loctite on it as well, blue Loctite to kind of seal it, and it still is removable. But now we're going to actually put the charge cooler back on this and then make sure it gets into the coupler. Before we secure the cooler, we're going to go ahead and put this back into its bracket. Depending on the pipe that you end up getting, you might have a provision for this. Ours does not, so we're going to leave the bracket attached to this. Just make sure it's not going to hit against the pipe so it doesn't rattle. Now we're going to lift this up. You want to make sure you have those grommets cleaned up. Make sure there's no dirt or debris on there. You can put a little bit of Vaseline on there as well if you want. That way it kind of lubes it up, makes it easier to slide in. You want to make sure all the connectors and everything is out of the way. You want to make sure this coupler bottoms out against the cooler. There's a lip. So you want to make sure that that coupler is all the way pushed up against the lip and push the cooler all the way down. Make sure it's on all the grommets. Now, just like how the top section of the coupler is bigger than the bottom, the clamp that's bigger needs to go to the top. And you can reuse your factory clamps if you want. This kit came with these clamps, so we're just going to use these. Now we're going to route the wiring back into its bracket. Just pushes in. Same with this vent hose. Pushes against that bracket, holds it in place. And we need to reinstall this vent hose back into the pipe. So you should hear it, both sides clip in. Now we need to put the connector onto the map sensor. So this just pushes in and you'll hear it clip in. Make sure nothing's going to rattle against this. All that's secure. So now we can start putting the 2 external Torx 8 bolts, one on this bracket right here, and one on the front of the engine on the bracket on the bottom. You might have to move the pipe around a little bit so that way you can get the bolt holes to line up. You want to make sure this tab slides into the hole, and then that should line up that bolt hole for you perfectly. Now, quick tip, don't tighten the other one until you have this one threaded in as well. Now we need to secure the expansion tank back in its grommet. This bottom section right here needs to go in the grommet right there. So you just slide it in. And then the rest of this is going to bolt to the actual braces and all of that. So with the intakes off, this is the perfect time to change your air filters. We just recently changed them. But one thing that I do want to give a tip on is this grommet on the bottom. So this grommet, usually when you pull the air box out, it's going to get stuck to the air box. But there's a clip right here. Now this clip needs to secure onto the pinch welds on the actual frame rail. So when you're putting this down, when you're installing the air box, the front section is going to slide into this air duct, and then you have to make sure that clip slides in around here. That way it secures that air box against the frame. And then we have another grommet up here, and that's going to be right here. Now you also have this clip in the front that's going to secure to the air intake as well. And you want to slide it into this with the hose going on top. So there's a lot of things that you want to make sure that you're getting lined up as you're installing. But that main one is going to be the grommet on the bottom. The orientation of the grommet is supposed to be like this, with the clip facing the engine. And then the rest of the grommet is going to go towards the fender rail. Now we have 2 more connectors left. This is the mass airflow sensor connector. Just slides right in. And then we have the vent hose, which also clips in. And you should hear 2 audible clicks, or 1 solid one. Then you have this section right here. The 2 tabs just secure the middle section. You have the hose that needs to sit inside of these brackets. And then you have this hose clamp that tightens it to the actual airbox. And you can use a 6mm socket or a flathead. Now we can start reassembly. So we're going to start with this cover right here. Make sure you have all of your connectors out of the way. We're going to slide this underneath this big connector. And there's a grommet that's right here, which is going to secure onto this. Now we can free up all of our towels. I would leave the glove on the bottom one, the big one, because we're not putting anything on there just yet. So here we have the Turner hot side charge pipes. They come with all of the couplers and the 2 pipes, as well as a few O-rings. So these 2 O-rings are going to go inside the pipe, and then we're going to reuse all of the clamps from the factory pipe. So you're going to see there's a groove on the inside where the O-ring needs to sit. Once it sits in there, we're golden. Now one thing you can do is use a little bit of Vaseline or petroleum jelly or any other rubber safe grease. I believe these seals are made out of Viton or some kind of other composition, so they should be oil resistant and all of that. This is just going to help it in going into the actual pipe on the turbo side. And you can do the same thing on the couplers. So we're going to start out by putting these onto the charge cooler. Now these are the same on both ends. So you just want to slide it on, orient the turner logo however you like, then get a clamp on there. We're going to go ahead and put the second clamp on there as well. So we've got both clamps on there. So we're going to start with the furthest away pipe. This section goes on the bottom. The E10 bolt is going to go through right here. Now here are the two E10 bolts that secure those charge pipes. So we're going to go ahead and thread those in. You want to start them out by hand. It is a little bit tricky to get to this back one, but you should be able to still get it. So now we're just going to tighten those down. You're not going to be able to fit a socket on there. So what you're going to need to do is use a box wrench. So if you don't have an external Torx 10 box wrench like this, then you're going to have to use an 8mm normal wrench. And you don't need to like tighten these down super tight, but make sure you get them nice and snug. Now we're going to guide this mass airflow sensor connector back over this, make sure it clips in. Next up is this intake boot. Make sure the clamps are oriented where they need to go. There's a little section for it. This boot also has a line that you're going to line up with that plastic boot that's coming out from down there. Now you're going to use a 6mm socket to tighten down the clamp. You could also use a flathead. You want to make sure this lines up with the air duct. This one goes into the grommet that's down in here. Then you have another grommet on this side, on the back side. And then you have the one on the bottom. Now we're just going to tighten the clamp. Plug in the mass airflow sensor. Let's see if this fits. That would be a no. So that might be a rattle, but for the most part it's on there. It's just this back section, because this pipe is so big, it's not hitting that grommet as it should. So another option would be to put a bigger grommet. Now we have these rubber covers for the strut towers, and this is actually going to have the bar, the carbon fiber strut bar, slide in. So we're just going to put it in there loosely. Now we have 6 E12s, 3 on each side to this metal brace. And we have 2 13mm bolts, 1 on each section right here in the front. We have 1 10mm bolt going to the expansion tank, and that's it. Now we have this rubber seal that goes on the back. There's a lip that you need to slide it into. Now this hose needs to go inside of the seal, so you just work it in there. Lastly, we have these covers that need to slide into the windshield cowl. So this section right here slides into the middle. Now you can lift this seal up and over the actual cover. And then you're just going to twist these 10mm plastic screws to line up the arrows. And there is a push tab that goes on this side, along with the push tabs that go on these rubber seals everywhere, the rubber covers. I'm not installing those, but if you had yours, go ahead and put those back on. This side is the same concept. This section is going to slide in. The rubber seal goes over the top of this. And then you have these 3 10mm plastic screws that you just tighten and line up the arrows. And then once again, you'll have a push tab on this side, along with this rubber all around it. And just like that, we've got the charge pipes installed and everything put back together. Now, the only problem that I think with these charge pipes, the only problem that I ran into actually for that matter, was just this plastic cover, the BMW M Power cover. So that back grommet is not hitting where it should be. So there might be a potential rattle here. You could put like a thicker grommet or kind of jerry rig it some way so that way it doesn't rattle. For right now, I just put a secondary grommet on top of the actual pin that comes out, and hopefully we'll see if it rattles. If it does, we'll figure it out then. But besides that, everything else is put back together. We've got some bigger charge pipes in there. We got the plastic cold side pipe replaced as well. So got a few upgrades. Now there's a few other things we're gonna do before we turn up the boost, but that's it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll see you guys in the next one.